Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Optimizing Mother podcast. I'm really excited to be sitting today with a dear friend, Mrs. Gillie Shanowitz. Hi, welcome.
Hi, it's really, really exciting to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Gillie wears many hats. She's a shlucha in Manhattan, a mother, Baruch Hashem, of a beautiful family. She's also on the Vaad of Sea Kids, chinuch. She's created curriculums that are used around the world. She also directed Detroit's teen camp this past summer, which brings me great memories because I was head counselor with Gillie 2 summers in a row, which was a lot of fun. And the truth is, it's an honor really to be sitting with Gillie because not only is she a very accomplished shlucha and has a lot what to share, we've been having these type of conversations for many, many years. Our conversations go back to high school where it started off maybe just from learning and achos, etc. But sometimes people would see us and they'd be like, are you guys friends? And we'd be like, yeah. We're animated. We're passionate. It might look like we're arguing, but actually we're just like discussing things because like somehow everything was like very black and white and clear to Gillie. And I was looking at things very, very differently. And anyways, I'm really excited to be sitting here and having this conversation because this is a result and built on years and years and years of discussions, literally from high school. So, okay. So are we ready to jump right in?
Let's do it.
Okay. So I know that, like we just mentioned, you are a very passionate person, and especially on the topic of chinuch. So, what are the main areas of passion? What do you believe very, very strongly on the topic?
So I'm going to take a step back and say that Baruch Hashem, I'm a young mother. I wouldn't say that I have a vast amount of experience as a mother. But that being said, I do feel like I'm very, very passionate about the chinuch I received as a girl from my parents. Definitely in the setting of camp. I've been there and, in that setting many, many years. So many of my perspectives on chinuch really come from my parents and the experience I have, but also the real passion comes through from the fact that I grew up hearing my mother's personal story of how she became a balas tshuva, how she met a shlucha in Brazil. She had an incredible life. She was a producer at NBC. She met all the who's who's of the world. And she always used to highlight in her speech, which is the speech I've heard, I would say, well over 1,000 times by this point, from my childhood up until now. Every time I hear it, I enjoy it more and more. She would always highlight how she was constantly interviewing, what was up and coming, what was, the cutting edge, whether it was in education, whether it was in marriage, whether it was in love, whether it was in all these topics. So whoever was selling a book, whoever was selling an idea, a theory, etc., she was constantly the one who was the host of this, bringing it out to the world, this message, this idea, etc. And she always used to say she would decide who would live and who would die on NBC TV, because this is what, for someone to be successful, they had to really make it into the world of media, etc., especially in those days where there weren't so many things out there. And she would always highlight and say in her speeches how what really stuck out to her was how to use a modern word, fluid the situation was. There was a constant changeover. One day, this was the only way to educate a child. And the next day, there was a new theory completely contradicting that theory and explaining how, no, this is the only way to raise a child.
The pendulum just kept swinging.
Kept swinging in all directions. And, and the world would buy it 1,000% and buy into it. It was the trend. And so she constantly would say how one of the things that really attracted her to Torah was the eternity of it, the eternal truth of it all. And that there's no blowing with the winds. This is the trend. That's the trend. Maybe this is a good idea. Maybe that's a good idea. So, if one day it's about the idea that we have to, my mother used to talk about this hilarious, I guess, theory in those days was primal scream therapy. I mean, I'm sorry, I say it's hilarious, but it was the idea that you had to re-experience that primal scream of coming out of your mother's birth canal in order to be able to truly get over, all of whatever deep down issues and traumas you have. And only then are you truly liberated and able to live a free and wonderful life. I mean, when we hear
and then things changed.
So then that was the thing of those days. And, people would bang on walls and would scream. And this is what, and it sounds funny maybe now, but that was something that was a thing. That was something people would do. Right. So again, I come from a place where I think my biggest passion is, having had all that background in mind, both of my parents were very strong, that Torah is eternal and that Torah wasn't given to us to know if a chicken is kosher or not. That too. But it's there to give us a message of how to live our life. And the more I learned Chassidus and the more I actually embraced Chassidus in high school, which is where we really got to become friends and know each other in 11th grade, the more you just saw it so starkly in the Rebbe's talks and in Sichais, etc. all the time. The Rebbe would just constantly repeat, like, Torah milashon hayra, right? Torah is Torah's emes, Torah's chaim, hayra b'chaim. It's a lesson for our life. You're supposed to take it. We're supposed to believe that it has the answers for us in our day-to-day life. For sure, and anything to do with raising our children and how we deal with ourselves, with others, in all relationships, in all situations, that's what the Torah is there to guide us to do. So my deepest passion is, we're so lucky. We're Yidden, we're Chassidim, and we have a Torah, and we have a Rebbe, and we have Chassidus. And to go looking anywhere else for kind of our perspectives, our mindsets, our philosophies on how to approach raising our children just seems so, it's almost sad to me. Like, why would we do that? We're so lucky. We're really just so lucky. So I would say that's one of my greatest passions when it comes to education. And from that perspective, a lot of things, stem from there.
Gillie, you recently wrote an article about chinuch, and it went viral. I saw it in many, many different groups. And I'm sure plenty of people told you, wow, I agree with it. Finally, someone's, saying this. But I've also seen a lot of people who actually fiercely disagree with you. And I'm curious if we could discuss that a little bit, where some people felt like not all kids could handle everything and some things are too intense. So can you sum up a little bit what your point was in that article? And could we just tease out a little bit, though, like if it really applies to everybody?
So just to start off with, don't worry, I also got plenty of feedback of people who don't agree with me. I welcome feedback and I love criticism. I am blessed to have gotten that from my parents. I very much feel like that's the only way that we can truly, like when we used to argue, right? You hash out something, you argue about it. And I don't think we should ever take these things personally. And I'm absolutely thrilled to hear other perspectives. I could disagree about it, but I'm totally fine to hear it. So I think that my main point of my article was as follows, and I used that backdrop of this past summer, which was an incredible summer. I had been given a lot of preparation warning, right? People know me, they know my personality, they know where I stand on a lot of issues, and they, to sum up a lot of the warning, so to speak, was just get ready, Gillie. Wait till you deal with today's teens. I'm not really easily fazed at all. And I wasn't fazed, to be honest, at all. Because I truly just didn't really think that there was something to be fazed by. And what just struck me so strongly, and it's interesting, I should have even just had it ready on my phone to show you. I literally, from maybe day number 2, messaged my friends to say, I probably even messaged you. And for sure when you came, which of course, as being friends, right away, it was like the first phone calls were to my friends, my family, whoever I felt was going to bring a tremendous amount of teichen and greatness to the campers in terms of growth, etc. Was that it's incredible to see how much, and this is a lot of teens. I'm not saying it's thousands, but it's not 4. It's 110 teens plus staff. We're dealing with 140 people who are in the range of teens, and nothing had changed. Literally nothing had changed, meaning the last time I had been in camp, as you mentioned, we were head counselors together, right? I had done regular camp with you. I had then, after having been a counselor there for 3 years in a row, I was a head counselor for the regular main camp, and then we were head counselors together for teen camp. Nothing had changed in the sense that the girls had the same comebacks, the girls had the same fetches, the girls had the same loves. Like, it wasn't something that was, I was ready and prepared for some drastic difference, even though I really in my heart didn't think it would be. And
you don't think kids are more exposed or more sensitive or need to be treated a little bit with more gently?
So again, first of all, yes and no. Meaning, kids were exposed plenty. Again, maybe because I was coming from a background and place where I didn't necessarily grow up in the standard Lubavitch home. I grew up in an incredible home, but I did not grow up with an upbringing of, no media, all these types of things. Again, my parents were very strong about whatever their standards were. But there definitely might be more exposure or less exposure. But so what? It doesn't change the nature of how we deal with children and what the bottom line is. And I think we'll get into that a little bit more soon. But the main point of the article was to say that the children hadn't really changed at all. The teens hadn't changed. It was actually the people around them who were educating them, the adults, their parents, the educators, the directors, everyone around them. And really from the perspective of what expectations they had and what they thought the girls were capable of. There was such a fear of what they were or were not capable of that there was, instead of operating from a place of what's good for these teens, what's good for these girls, they were operating from a place of let's not, God forbid, squish them too much. And I think that it actually accomplishes many things that are extremely negative for our girls and for our teens. And for, obviously I'm not a very big maven with regards to boys, as I mentioned. I'm talking here from personal experience, etc. And I also don't think that that's a Torah perspective. I don't think that this is a Hasidic perspective. I think a lot of where we get these mindsets from come from the outside world. And they're influencing and impacting our ability to see things clearly from a Torah perspective. And I think we'll get into that more.
I was amazed how it actually ended up turning into a joke in a positive way. Like the example you wrote in the article was about enforcing Shabbos shoes, and Shabbos shoes became like the joke of the century in a good way. They all wore their Shabbos shoes.
Yeah, no, it was incredible. And I love that. It's totally fine. It's great for them to, the girls were very aware. Listen, I still don't feel that kids appreciate when they see adults caving. If Shabbos shoes is something we believe in. Now, I firmly believe in this. I grew up with the idea that Shabbos was holy. We treat it as something holy. We don't do the same thing ever. We don't wear the same things, not on our feet, not on our hair. Everything was Shabbos-dik. I mean, we had Shabbos coats. Everything was Shabbos-dik. Again, there's no defined line. Different communities have different standards. But
if it's important to you, then enforce it.
If it's a standard of the home, and again, don't lower your standards because you're worried. It's coming from a place of not that you actually don't feel like it's important. You're lowering your standards because they can't handle it. That's a horrible thing for kids. I mean, in general, the fact that a kid feels that they have the ability to control what the adult in their life demands of them or not is in itself extremely anxiety provoking. As a teen ourselves, when I used to push back on my mother, I think the worst thing I could have possibly felt, like the biggest insecurity, was a moment where I felt like I had the ability to push so hard that she'll just cave. It's like pushing on a bar, God forbid, on a highway. Imagine you feel like it's wobbly. It doesn't feel safe. You feel like so insecure in a car. You could just flip right over because it'll just break the second you touch it. That's a horribly insecure feeling. And I don't think it's good for them. And to the contrary, I think we're going to go into also a little bit about the fact of the girls are capable of so much more than what we're giving them. So when you're operating at a level where you're constantly catering to the lowest common denominator, and when I mean that, there's, God forbid, not to insult, but there's a very, very big difference between a child who's in need of an exception and catering to everyone like they are the exception. And what we're doing is, instead of actually lifting the girls who are the exception to maybe be a little more than they could have been, we're taking everyone who has a greater potential and we're lowering it. And I'm sorry, that causes a tremendous amount of a lack of, people are obsessed these days and very, very strong about a child feeling healthy. That accomplishes the opposite of it. And in Yiddishkeit and in Torah, you just see the opposite. Everything is the opposite. Imagine if the Tanya was a Sefer Shel Rishayim. I mean, being a Sefer Shel Beinanim, think about the level you have to be a Beinani. You have to be perfect in thought, speech, and action. I mean, that's high level stuff. And not only that, it says Ki karev helecha. Like it's close to us. This is within our reach. The Torah Hashem tells us you're capable of this. You're capable of. Alter Rebbe is telling you this is what you're capable of. Know your potential and know what to work for. Don't lower the potential. Even a simple thing, but in Yiddishkeit, we don't lower a mezuzah. We take a child, we pick them up to kiss a mezuzah. That's what we do in Yiddishkeit.
So how would you translate this into a home? I know you did this in a camp. How would you translate this into parents being mechanech their children?
I think, first of all, it's, I grew up with a story in my home all the time. My mother would repeat this. She spent, Baruch Hashem, my mother raised us with, we didn't have a family because my mother was a Balas Shuva. My father came from a traditional Orthodox home, but he had one brother who never married. So we really didn't have family, the way people have aunts and uncles and cousins. We didn't have that, but my mother did something really, a gift that she gave us, is that she really adopted families, like whether they wanted it or not. They became a part of our life. And there were families, the Kotlarski family, the Klein family, the Groner family, the Chitcher family. These families became kind of our place of being, right? Our place that we would spend Yamim Tovim, our places we would spend Shabbosim, the people she would go and kind of lean into to seek advice if she didn't feel like she had the proper perspective, because she was a Balas Tshuva and she was coming from a place of not knowing, obviously, to the same extent, etc. So we really grew up with this. One of the incredible families my mother actually brought into our lives was the Klein family. My father was the Rebbe's doctor. So many of the families were the people who were really close and around the Rebbe a lot. My father lived in Rabbi and Mrs. Klein's home. Actually, after the Rebbe moved out of 770 on Rosh Chodesh Kislev, he actually went to go live with the Kleins. And, they were my father's interferent at his wedding. And Mrs. Klein used to always repeat a story, or she told my mother the story, and my mother would repeat the story a lot because I guess she appreciated it a lot. That when she would go to the bungalow colony, she actually was there with Rebbetzin Altein. And she used to hear Rebbetzin Altein tell her children, I don't care if you grow up to hate me, but a mensch you're going to be. Now that could sound very harsh, but to me, that sounds like the most selfless thing a mother can say or do. What she's saying in other words was, I love you too much to let my standards be dictated by what you feel you would like the standards to be. So for starters, in our homes, what dictates our standards? Where do we decide where the bottom line is? What has to be that way? It has to be that it's coming from a place of Torah, from a place of Chassidus. It can't be coming from a place of fear. If your decisions of your standards is coming from a place of fear of, can they handle it? Will this risk our relationship? Then your decisions are not coming from a clarity. They're coming from a place of fear. And fear is the worst place to make a decision from.
But what about like chinuch l'nar al pi darkai? Like you're speaking about this very high standard across the board. Not everyone is the same and needs to be raised the same.
So that's a great question. I hear this a lot. I'm not sure how we've come to a point where chinuch l'nar al pi darkai has translated to be that we've then changed standards. Meaning, look at the Torah, right? We're in Parshas Truma. Like there's, the luchais are going into the aray, are going into the Kodesh Kodashim. There's no part in the luchais like life tzach, but chinuch l'nar al pi darkai. Kabed es avicha v'asimecha, but chinuch l'nar al pi darkai. Maybe not, this child is not capable of it. Zachar es yom haShabbos l'katchei, but maybe this child is too much for them.
So how do you understand chinuch l'nar?
So at the end of the day, chinuch l'nar al pi darkai doesn't say, there's no place for it in terms of the foundation where Yiddishkeit starts. There's mitzvahs, there's Torah, there's the Rebbe's Hayras, if we're Chassidim. These are the baseline. This is where we start from. Then how we give it over to our child. So for example, not even how we give it over, because even that, I think we can go into a little more, the ideas of Yira and Kabbalas, all things that have just completely gone to the wayside, again, because of just trending things that are coming our way. But, I was just it was just the Kinas HaShlachais, and we were having a conversation with some younger Shlachais, and they were highlighting the fact that they brought up this chinuch l'nar al pi darkai, and in general,
I thought I was the only original one.
Mamash. And they, they were bringing up how really in Torah, everything there's so much nuance. I would say another thing I'm very passionate about, just to digress for a second, is that actually I think that that's a very trendy word these days. Torah is actually very simple. It's not complicated. It's very hard. It's very difficult. And that's what Avodah is. It's a lot of hard work, but it's not complicated. So when they say about chinuch l'nar al pi darkai, and there's that baseline of this is what we do. So kosher, we eat kosher. There's no one who's not capable of keeping kosher. However, was the cutest thing. One of the mothers was talking about, one of the shluchais, who's a mother, obviously, was talking about the fact that one of her children is just a different soul. Like he's just a different child. Like
marches to his own beat.
Right, whatever was simple for every kid. And she was using the example of packing lunches. So she was saying at the end of the day, packing a lunch with him is a 20 to 25 minute ordeal. And so there was a little bit of pushback because we were discussing the idea of Kabbalas Ol. I said, Kabbalas Ol still remains. It's still mommy says so. This is what we do. However, she was highlighting what she did, which I thought was brilliant. So every Sunday, she was saying that what does she do with her son? She lines up 5 lunch bags and she, together with him, packs his lunches. There's no stress. It's not in the morning. He has time. It's not this pressurizing environment. And they pack the lunches together and he's good to go for the week. Brilliant. That's wonderful. The baseline hasn't changed. What mommy says goes. There is a foundation of Kabbalas Ol, but she found a way to get him to a place where, he doesn't have to be feeling the sense of pressure and it becomes a very stressful situation for him. And that's great. She understands that this child specifically needs a little bit of a different route than whatever normal schedule she has. Every other kid packs their lunch the morning of. There's no mitzvah in the Torah that you have to pack your lunch the morning of, right? Now, again, if a parent feels very stuck that this is what has to happen, that might be the area where someone would say, wait, chanech lenar al pi darka, it's possible and it's okay, unless it's absolutely impossible, in which case you have to help the kid acclimate. Not everything, and they're going to be in the big world out there. No, not everything will be able to acclimate to their specific, style, etc. And that's also important.
Yeah, but in the article, it sounds like you're talking about like standards in general, including academic or including everything. And I'm curious, again, where do you see chanech lenar al pi darka comes in if we have to have these like high bars for everybody?
Okay, so growing up, we always grew up with the story of Reb Zusha, right? I mean, the story of Reb Zusha was, no one's going to ask you, why weren't you like Moshe? They're going to ask you why you weren't like Zusha. And this is a great gift that I think my parents raised me with, I think is a Jewish concept. And now I know. At the end of the day, Hashem gave us talents, Hashem gave us choshim, Hashem gave us strengths, and it's our job to use them to the fullest ability, right? And, the Rebbe used to constantly repeat, right? We're actually meant to use everything we have just for the purpose of serving our Creator. And therefore, my mother used to tell us all the time, and my father, honestly, if you have the brain of 100, we expect nothing less of 100. If you have the brain of 75, then we expect no less than a 75. 65 won't cut it. And there's such a gift in that because the child, yes, you're acknowledging that they're not the same. Not every child is 100 child. That's fine. Hashem doesn't give everyone equal kaichais. But you're telling the child, I believe in you up to your potential. I'm going to push you to where you're capable of getting and reaching your potential. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like really reaching a potential that...
And as a whole, as a society, you think like we're not helping people reach their potential. Is that your point?
I think as a society, again, we're being infused with a lot of catering to whether it's someone's emotions, whether it's someone's, we're absolutely petrified of a child feeling too stressed or feeling too much intensity. And maybe, again, a lot of it comes from a place of fear, whether you feel like because that will happen, it'll bounce back in other areas in a negative way. I'm not such an expert in, what's being fed to the world. I just hear it through the arguments I have. And this is the impression I'm getting. Also with regards to the teens, you don't even know, just be happy that they're keeping Shabbos. No, I'm not happy that a bunch of girls who grew up in Hasidic homes, or even if they didn't grow up in a Hasidic home, but that's the majority. So yes, there are exceptions in camp, and I think it's beautiful and Baruch Hashem. They grew up going to Hasidic maistais where they were taught right from wrong. No, I'm not going to give them a baseline of I'm going to be happy that they're keeping Shabbos. No, why would I want to do that? They deserve more. We should expect more of them. They're capable of so much more. And you should have seen what was going on in camp. The girls, by the end of camp, the amount of growth that happened, I still hear about it and see it on the streets today. And what's the incredible thing is, many people say, Gillie, you don't care because you don't care to be not liked. And it's very hard to be not liked. Going back to the rabbits, an all-time thing. It's a very selfish thing to be caring about being liked or not. And funnily enough, a lot of people will make it sound almost, coming from a place of, idealism. Really, in order to be having a hashpah on someone, you really have to be liked, and only then will you be able to have hashpah. That's not the foundation of Yiddishkeit. It's not how Yiddishkeit is. We're in Parshas Truma, and it talks about in Parshas Truma, the Rebbe says a sikha, and I remember learning this sikha either in 11th or 12th grade, at my father's Tuesday shiur. So just to give a little background, my father was very sick. I'm sure, like you remember, obviously you're a very big part of it. In 10th grade, he was diagnosed with pancreatic, and he was obviously, he needed a really big miracle. So, of course, what's the Chassidus response? What did the teen camp staff do? I'd been in teen camp this summer. They started a shiur. We started learning Chassidus once a week. We learned a sikha from the Rebbe on Tuesdays, 8 to 8:30, in the beautiful BJJ fashion. Even that, like on time, started on time, ended on time. We are capable of starting on time. We are capable of ending on time. Again, these are all things where, and it's a beautiful chassid, and it's a value that we have. A chassid is a masudar. All these things, that we kind of just, it's fine. Everything's fine. Like the world will never end, as we say.
So what was the sikha?
The sikha was about the adanim in the Mishkan. And the fact is, in terms of the trumas, in terms of how the Yidden contributed, that had to be given. It was silver. That danim were silver, and
the danim are the sockets.
The sockets, correct. The sockets, the beams were put into for the Mishkan, which essentially is the foundation of the Mishkan. Which is why it had to be given as a half a shekel. It was given equally, whether you were rich, a billionaire, whether you were the poorest of poor. Everyone had to give a half a shekel, and it went to the adanim, the foundation of the Mishkan, and it represented the idea of Kabbalah Sol and Bittul. At the end of the day, this is something that has to be completely baseline across the board. There's no such thing as, well, for some people, they have to operate as Kabbalah in a manner of Kabbalah Sol, and for other people, that's too much for them. They need to hear an explanation on everything. No, there's no concept in Chassidus that there's an exception for this. This is the baseline. The first thing in Chassidus is that Kabbalah Sol is our foundation, because I said so. That is the foundation of how we should be raising our children. That's the foundation of how Hashem raised us as his people.
But it's not enough, and you can't stop there. There's Kabbalah Sol. That's rachis. That's only rachis. After that, we actually heard this in a previous podcast. You want the relationship, and I just want to question you a second, Gillie, because you're saying you're almost making as if the relationship is irrelevant. But Chassidus does talk about, in order for hashpa to happen from the 6 midas, from the mashpia to the makabel, there does need to be yesod, which is bonding, which is foundation. There does need to be a relationship in order to give something over. And I feel like you're almost taking for granted that parents do need to show love to kids.
So I guess I'm reacting to what I see lacking as opposed to what I see a lot of. I hear a lot of connection, bonding, relationship with kids. That's, I think, the trending things these days.
But it's not irrelevant.
But it's negating the Kabbalah Sol. I see it constantly contradicting the foundation. Foundations means that's the starting point. And if it's not there, the whole house crashes down. If it's not solidified, if it's not your premise, if it's not where you start from, so many elements. The Rebbe started the idea of having tzivos Hashem. These are things that are just foundational. And
by the way, that letter is amazing. Learning the Rebbe writing about why he started tzivos Hashem. The Rebbe says, I put thought into it, how to get American children, and I came up with this model of choosing to be in an army and choosing to have discipline. You see this all the time. Kids go to the military because they crave that discipline.
Again, let's just start from the beginning. It's funny. The summer after my father passed away, my mother was invited to speak at a key conference in Manchester by the Shulchan there. She was the keynote together with Lady Jacobowitz, the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom's wife. And in addition, they asked her to do a workshop on chinuch. I feel like these days it would be a parenting workshop, but it was called chinuch. And I had been with my mother to these things. I'd been around the block. My mother definitely has had these passionate conversations with many people. Again, this was her passion as well, about Torah having everything. And many times I had heard the response being, but what about parents who don't love their children? What about parents who abuse their children? What about parents? And I said, Ma, how about you start off let's remind ourselves, I was all of 15 years old. So this is my brilliant contribution at 15 years old. I said, Ma, why don't you start off your workshop by saying, this is a workshop for parents who love their children and want what's best for them. So this way we could just get that all out of the way. Yes, we all love our children. And and we all want what's best for them. The question is, where are we getting our inspiration of what's best for them? Where are we getting all of this, direction from? Our kids are Yiddish kids. They have neshamas. The fact is that what the outside world has to say has no concept. They don't know anything about a neshama, etc. Also, I think going back for a second, understanding in my upbringing, my parents had incredibly strong demands from us. We were brought up with a tremendous amount of, everything. There were rules. There were standards, how we answered a phone, how we hung up from a phone, manners, everything, which is interesting. Again, look at Kali Chinuch V'Hadracha. What's the role and goal of a parent? Because going back, I think that things are, in terms of bonding and connection and obviously discussing things more and understanding more, there's times and stages for that. And the Torah actually highlights this point, right? So you're supposed to start off with the young children in preschool. They're supposed to be learning mamish manners.
Seder v'nikayim.
Seder v'nikayim. Yeah, and midas. Midas type is how to channel their emotions as opposed to, so for example, it's not about recognizing that this is an emotion. No. You're supposed to teach them literally, from the marvelous midas machine. Midas are the way we act and how we think and feel. The Torah tells us just what we should do. This is what we're supposed to help kids understand. No, we're supposed to it's not a good thing to be angry. Hashem doesn't want us to be angry. We're supposed to share and have Avos Yisrael. These are the things we're supposed to be teaching them at this age. But sometimes we can get distracted by the information we're being fed about and questioning basic things that the Torah teaches us is how we're supposed to be doing things. So going back, I grew up with a tremendous amount of standards and pushing us to our potential, but at the same time, a tremendous amount of, I knew my parents loved me to death. And my mother would say that, she said, there's no one in the world who loves you more than me. So why would I do this for you if not for the fact that I love you? And so again, everyone's different. Everyone has different personalities. Not everyone's as expressive. Some people are less expressive, more expressive. I think that bottom line, again, there's a little bit of a trend these days to take a step back and judge our parents and analyze our childhoods. And again, this also comes from the outside world, which is completely antithetical to Torah. We are not supposed to judge our parents. We're not supposed to sit there and condemn and pass judgment on what was done to us. We believe we have emunah. There's a concept of whatever happened in our life, it's hashgacha pratis, and it was meant for us. In fact, there's a very interesting story in our personal family where my grandmother, my mother's mother, went by the Rebbe for dollars with my mother. And the Rebbe gave her $1. You can watch it. It's unbelievable. The Rebbe gave her $1 and thanked my grandmother for the education she gave my mother that she's using still today. Now, I'm not going to get into full detail, but the education my grandmother gave my mother was definitely not a Bais Rivkah education. I mean, just to say the least, it was the very opposite, literally the opposite. But at the same time, the Rebbe felt that obviously that was giving her a message, that thanking her for it, whether it be the discipline she learned there, whether it be the work ethic, these types of things. But to the flip side, even the negative things, you can get all caught up. I made a mistake. I didn't make a mistake. This was obviously meant for my mother's tafkid in this world.
It might be a hashgacha pratis, but what about just like analyzing this is what happened and how could I do better for my children?
100%. I don't think that my grandmother, was at a point and she wasn't from, and obviously the Rebbe knew where she was coming from, and the Rebbe was obviously highlighting something. I think that what I would take from that is to be that at the end of the day, of course, it's our job, and like I am passionate about, to do our best to educate our children through what the Rebbe would want from us, through Torah, etc. However, at the same time, when it comes to judging what our parents did to us, everything's hashgacha pratis. We believe in emunah and we have faith that whatever happened was meant to be, meaning I'm talking from a child's perspective as opposed to the parent. The parent's supposed to do the best they can, of course, and we're supposed to make sure that our kids, but if we're going to sit there in judgment of our childhood and our parents, there's a little bit of a lack of emunah in there, right? I'm not judging an individual. I'm saying what the ideal is and what we should be thinking. This was what was meant to be for us, and clearly every one of us has a mission in this world and a purpose in this world, and whatever our childhood was, that's what was it. Every single part of it is obviously going to help us in our avodas Hashem for our life and our personal mission, or else it wouldn't have happened to us, right? It's just a different perspective.
Right. You know what I'm curious about, knowing you, even as a friend, just a few years I knew you, as you were growing up and your mother became she kind of was taking on more things, especially in Lubavitch, and she was almost like upping the standards on you. So what was that like for you, and how would you apply that in chinuch? When you decide you want to, as a family, grow and adopt a higher standard, whether it's in eating and kashrus and music and in media and anything like.
Yeah, no, 100%. We always joke about this. We would say, oh no, Ma's going to another convention. Oh no, Ma's going to a speech. Oh no, Ma's on the phone with Mrs. Kolarski. Oh no, this would be, oh no, what's happening in our home next? What are we losing? What are we not going to have anymore? Oh no, Chal Yisrael. We have to have Chal Yisrael. Oh my gosh, no more TV, no more movies, whatever it was like everyone holding their breath. And it's funny because we grew up with a story. It didn't happen with me. It happened with my brother, where he was a little older when we started keeping Chal Yisrael. And, we liked the food. It was what we were used to, whatever treats it was, etc. He wasn't thrilled, to put it mildly. And my mother, one of her mashbiach, Rabiel and Rebbetzin Leah Khan, they were actually her interferent as well. And she was, I guess, talking, I don't know the exact context, but I guess she was either talking to Rebbetzin Khan about the struggle she's having with my brother, or, my brother was there. So I don't know the exact details, but she was saying that there's being pushback. There's a lot of, and honestly, you could think justified pushback. Poor kid, right? He's 10 years old. He's 11 years old. And all of a sudden he wants his Haagen-Dazs. He wants his Ent, whatever it is. And so Mrs. Khan, I'm pretty sure it was directly to my brother. She said, do you have a bike? So he said, yeah. She said, how many speed bike is it? So I don't know if it was a 1 or a 2 or 3, whatever speed bike it was. She said, if I offered you a 10 speed bike, would you want it? He said, of course, it's much better. She said, Chalav Yisrael is a 10-speed bike of kashrus. Now, again, for us as Chassidim, we should know that Chalav Yisrael is kosher for us. Like there is no, we don't look at it as anything else. However, for a kid who's coming from a growing place, that was the message. If we believe with our hearts, with our full hearts, that this is what is good for our family, the same way we're so unapologetic. Who's apologetic when they find out, oh my gosh, did you find out that the seatbelt, a new way of putting it is what's safer, right? Or the new way of strapping on the car seat. No one sits there and gets, I can't grow because that might be too stressful for my kid. What do you mean? It's for their safety. We wouldn't think twice about it. If you found out that brushing your teeth twice a day is literally the only thing that's going to save your child from, having their teeth fall out of 50, you would change without any hesitation, without any apology, right? Our ruchnius health is just as important, and growing is the greatest brachas to bring our family, but you have to believe it. If you don't believe it, and we felt that belief from my mother, we felt that passion from my mother, and I'll go back to the other thing, she didn't operate from a place of fear. There was no place of, well, what if they don't like it? There was such a confidence in this is what's good for them, the same way that we're confident about, we don't sit there, what are they going to say when we say they have to wear a helmet? We don't worry about it. Even if there is pushback, we don't worry about it. It's a non-conversation. It's like, it's a helmet. Like, I love you. You have to wear it, right? These are things that are just so unapologetic, and that comes through. It comes through. The kids are not stupid. Kids feel it. They know what you're passionate about. They know what it is that you're not willing to move on. And even growing, when you're changing on them, we feel it. We feel when it comes from a place of, this is what's good for you. This is something good. MS, exactly. And they really feel it, really. And it's something that, again, and I don't know if I even finished the thought, but I think that my parents constantly showed us a tremendous amount of love, and we had a great amount of experience. And by the way, when we had situations where my parents, we were at doctor conferences or with my mother's old friends, and we were in a situation where we could not eat the birthday cake, and we could not, shluchim actually deal with this, but for us, we weren't on shluchos. It was just really annoying. We're in a party and we can't participate. We can't go in the pool. We can't, whatever it was. She would recognize that. She would recognize that effort, and she would take us. We're going to go for ice cream afterwards. She would make sure that became in itself an exciting experience. We were almost more excited for after the party than during the party, right? Like, we're waiting for like the after.
Right. But what about if it's not like halacha, but it's more like hashkafa, like, and different kids could handle different things. Like, how do you know when to push someone or not?
So I guess maybe give me an example if you have one. What would be an example of what you're talking about? Because we're obviously talking.
I don't know how much telling this to say Shabbos Avrahim, whether Nuguna Meta Simcha or not. I mean, there's different kids who can handle different things, and it's not straight up halacha.
Right?
How do you know?
Right. No, I get it. So I think again, like, isn't Tyra and Rebbe so incredible? Like, we have a mashpia. We have people in our life, even hopefully we should. Honestly, I feel gifted that I grew up with parents who revered their parents. Even if they didn't think their parents were perfect, I don't think they thought their parents were perfect. But there was an aura in the home that our parents were revered. That in itself is a gift to our children, that, they have it. So you have people in your life, whether it's your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles. If you don't have that family, again, try and get yourself to have that family. And you have a mashpia, ask them. Hopefully people with more experience. It's a very silly thing to get, advice. I always never understood that, even with people reading parenting books, I always laugh, like, from their vast knowledge of raising children, they probably had 1.5 children, and they were probably, in a family themselves, and were, one of two or one themselves, and probably had 5.5 cousins. Like, from where exactly do they have their great wisdom of how to raise children? I don't know. But we're surrounded by people who've raised beautiful families. Even if they're not related to us, find people that you appreciate how their homes look. What did you do? I'm curious to hear. When did you start pushing Shabbos Avrahim Telem? How much did you do? This child is more inclined to push them harder because their potential is greater. That's the job of a mother. And believe in your chachmas nashim. Hashem gave us something. Remember that. We have to stop second guessing ourselves. We have to start leaning into our upbringings, our chinuch, our Torah, our Rebbe, our Haraz. Come to a place, doing all the steps. The Rebbe gave us this guide. Have a mashpia. That's great. Like, of course you have to adjust, and when it's not a baseline fundamental element. But whatever you decide is the baseline for your home, you're entitled to. You're the boss of your home. At the end of the day, is on the side of Ben Adam Lamakayim, because there's an element, yes, Hashem is a third partner, but there's also the element of how we interact with our parents is supposed to guide us in how we interact with Hashem. So again, our parents are the bosses of our home. I use the word boss just to be there's Kabbalah Sal. This is the standards of our home. This is what we do. And again, of course, then after that, you see every kid's nature, etc. Most kids, though, can handle whatever it is that's brought to them in terms of what it is that you're demanding of them. I would say 99.9% of children. There really isn't. And again, there's no exceptions with regards to the actual mitzvahs, unless chas v'shalom, for example, we know kids are born with special needs, special neshamas. Obviously, we're not talking about that. Of course not. But this is our perspective. Again, I just feel like when you come from a Torah perspective or a perspective coming from the Rebbe's perspective, you just see everything in front of you differently. So you don't, what if this and what if that? With the Shabbos shoes, it was very interesting because I had an interaction with a camper. The first Shabbos, the first Friday, I made it very clear with the campers, when they were expected to wear their Shabbos shoes, when they could change to their slippers. Sneakers were absolutely not on the table. Of course, there was the exception for the girl who had a foot issue. Again, when people say, but we don't have to operate always with disclaimers. We could say the rule and then we could be, understanding of the one exception, not the majority exception, which then makes it not an exception. So she pushed back after I gave a whole speech about what the demands were, what the expectations were, I should say. And I gave a story also that we grew up in, I grew up in Rabbi Klarsky's home. He used to always repeat how he visited an old age home, spoke to a man there who was crying to him that his grandfather called it the Holy Shabbos. His father called it Shabbos. He calls it Sabbath or Shabbat, Saturday. His son calls it Saturday, and he's scared to know what his grandson's going to call it. And I said, girls, we are going to make sure that it's the Holy Shabbos in Camp DTC from head to toe, every part of it.
Heilige Shabbos.
Heilige Shabbos. And the girl came over to me afterwards and started explaining to me, I always laugh because I actually love the campers. Like I really enjoy it. Even in the moments where I'm being very strict, I have such a love towards them because I really see myself in them. I have a passion to just get that kid to the place where they're feeling so confident and wonderful because they're being pushed and they are following expectations. And no, they're not being made to feel like the exception for everything and kind of ignored and dismissed, or even just, because no one wants to deal with them. That gets me so upset. And this girl comes and explains to me have you ever heard of ADHD? Have you ever heard of sensory issues? And this is just not possible for her because it's just too uncomfortable. And, before camp, there was a very clear understanding that this is what's going to be demanded and expected. And they had to sign that this was the expectation. And I told her, I said, this camp actually doesn't cater to girls with ADHD or sensory issues that inhibit their abilities to wear Shabbos shoes. So that's just not an option here. I'm so sorry. Guess what? She wore Shabbos shoes for 4 Shabbosim.
And she was fine.
Maybe she was uncomfortable. So what? So what? So she was a little uncomfortable. I'm sorry. Yiddishkeit doesn't always feel comfortable. And the more...
Can't that ruin the camp experience, the Yiddishkeit association?
Only if you're scared it will. Absolutely not. No, I'm going to say, when I spoke to my staff, I said we are going to have very high standards in everything. I don't think it's fair to demand of kids without giving as well, in the sense of there's Yemim Nikareves and a small decha. My mother used to always say that. And there has to be that recognition. And you're going to work hard, but you're going to see the rewards for that work and that effort. You're going to be treated to, when they're having a Rebbe dime as the reward for studying Chidon, and they're having a Rebbe dollar as the reward for the growth program, and they're having, the trips be the top trips. Then you're
saying top Gashmias also, not just top Ruchnias.
Yeah, everything should be at the top. Because again, not in a way of spoiling, because I think that in itself, I think we Baruch Hashem, we're a chelik l'kam mamish, and I think when we're too megushim dik, we pasha get sick. And I think that the kids these days, a lot of that is happening. But when they see that there's a thought put into it. So for example, I don't know if you remember, because I don't remember which Shabbos you came exactly.
Are you talking about paper goods?
Yes.
Yes, I walked in.
Oh
I'm like,
gosh.
Gillie, this doesn't look like Shabbos again.
And you know what? I it's so funny because I guess as a girl, it didn't strike us as much. And also everyone wore Shabbos shoes. So it wasn't a thing or conversation, but because I was talking about it so much, Holy Shabbos, etc. I walked into the dining room for the first time and I couldn't believe it. The white plastic tablecloths and the styrofoam plates. I couldn't believe it. It's Shabbos. And yeah, there was always the token nice napkin, but let's be real. It didn't feel like Shabbos. It took us some time because they have to make orders, etc. And I'm sure people dealing with the budget were not happy with me, but absolutely.
It looked like a Shabbos Shabbat.
It looked gorgeous. It was stunning paper goods, stunning napkins, stunning cups. Everything was beautiful. The tablecloths, it felt different. And that's important too. And of course that's important. And I really, really think that's something definitely important to highlight. But again, it comes from Yiddishkeit. It's not coming from a place of I'm scared of how they'll react, so I'm going to bribe. It's where is it coming from?
Right. What's your frame of reference?
Right.
So I hear your general, passion. The flip side of that is, so what are some pet peeves you have that drive you nuts that are related to this general passion?
So Sara, you know me way too well. I wouldn't necessarily, something that comes to mind is not a pet peeve. I'd say there's 2 things that really come to mind, but One of them is not a pet peeve, but I want to just paint a scene that happened at the end of camp. It's at night. This is the way Detroit, this is how we do it. It's at night. It's after banquet. They have to load buses to go to the airport because they all have early morning flights. And, the process of handing back the phones was starting, right? I'm not exaggerating when I say tears pouring down. And I'm not talking about girls who maybe you could say, oh, you could dismiss it as this girl is maybe not socially super popular. Socially very popular girls, very, very much the ones who are leading the trends with the friends and surrounded. Don't get an impression that this is anything but that. Sobbing, begging not to get their phone back. Like,
why? What were they saying? They don't want their phone back because what? Like, it's so shocking to me because I see the girls grabbing their phone. So why after a month in camp did they not want their phone?
I think it just highlights a lot of what we've been saying is that at the end of the day, just because a kid wants it and just because they have when they have it in their hands, they're going to be stuck to it, doesn't mean they don't feel and know that it's horrible for them. And at the end of the day, they wish the adult in their life would take hold of the driver's seat, take the wheel, and say no. They actually wish it, no matter how much they're going to beg you not to. Because they see and feel the difference of what a month is like. We had zero pushback when we had our Shabbaton, our reunion, to take the phones. There was no conversation about it. They were thrilled. They're thrilled to spend time with their friends in an environment where nobody has their phone. And that's another thing that I found very interesting and I'm very passionate about, and maybe as a pet peeve of mine. I can't stand when there's a rule put in place. And when the rule is put in place, everybody knows no one's going to enforce it, including the people who made the rule. I don't know what it is that they feel it's important to put it there. Maybe they just feel like they have to be Yitzhazine. But it's the most horrible message we give the girls.
But who wants to be busy policing enforcement of rules?
Who wants to be busy waking up to nurse at 3 o'clock in the morning? I mean, who wants to do any of this? The question is it good for them? Is it good for, and that's a lot. That's another thing.
Is it important to be policing?
It depends. Absolutely. Is it important to police your child to wear a seatbelt? Is it important to police your child to brush your teeth? Is it important to police your child to be in a shower? Is it important? Like, are these things important? Take it a step back. Of course, if it's important, it's important. These things are important. And at the end of the day, it's just a rule. If you put it there and you don't enforce it, you have completely undermined your authority. And it's also, you make anyone who follows the rule feel like a loser. So what happens in camp? Everyone's phone is taken away. You don't feel like a loser because no one else has their phone, right? Which is why they feel so liberated when they come and they get their phone taken away. I wouldn't say it's a pet peeve, but I'm super strong and passionate that the adults in our kids' lives should be in that mode of, I don't care if you hate me, but this is not good for you. And I'm not, and I love you enough to be able to be the not popular one in your life. That's what I mean when I say it's not about the relationship. If all you care about is the relationship, then it does bother you that your child is very upset with you right now, or is even saying things that are that sound extreme and you're the worst, whatever, things that they shouldn't be saying, obviously, because we shouldn't be speaking like that. But let's just talk honestly about how sometimes teens react. That's, if you're coming from a place of worrying that the relationship is going to be frayed, then again, it's not coming with clarity.
You realize this goes contrary to what everyone says today, that the relationship is the most important thing and that's all they need.
Right. And I would challenge them to tell me we're in Torah and Chassidus, that's what we're taught. Because a lot of people challenge me, like, are you comfortable with the level of Chassidus and Yiddishkeit, to really be calling, to really be saying what you're saying? That's another pet peeve. I completely reject that premise. I'm sorry. Torah was given, and I think the Baal Shem Tov even highlighted this even more, for the simple folk. I don't need to be a Talmida Chachama. I don't need to be the most learned person in Chassidus. I got, Baruch Hashem, a beautiful education in Bais Rivkah High School. And I think that we have gotten a very, very clear, basic level of understanding that I don't see where that is in Torah and Yiddishkeit and Chassidus. Again, that, just to be clear, that doesn't mean it's not part of course, in Kol Chinuch V'Hadracha, the Rebbe talks about chinuch and the idea of that kesher. What I'm saying is that's not the premise. That's not that's part of it. Whereas now that has become the ultimate goal. That is the only thing that matters. And I don't see that in Yiddishkeit. I don't see that in Torah. And so I would challenge them to tell me where in Yiddishkeit it says that this is the start, beginning, middle, and end. And I would love to have that discussion, understand and hear more and learn more, because I just don't think that that's where it starts and ends in Torah at all. Hashem starts off with, because I said so, for the most part, literally from the beginning of time, from Adam and Chava. We're starting off with a no. There are so many things, Yira, Kadma Ava. Of course, there's Ava afterwards, but where do you start, and where are you starting from, and where you build things up? It's a building. So the foundation has to be very strong.
There's actually something that was bothering me about our conversation. I know I was the one that asked you about policing, but there is a sikha that I remember learning from Parshas Shoftim, where the Rebbe says that as we get to Mashiach times, we transition from being shaitrim, policemen, to yayatzim, to advisors. How do you understand this idea of chinuch not only being about policing, but transitioning into the yayatz, into the being a trusted advisor for your children?
So it's very interesting. I don't know if you remember, Sara. I feel like your memory is the only thing that I absolutely can rely on 1,000% when it comes to our high school and our seminary experience. But I'm not sure if you remember what my speech was when we did speech time. With Mrs. Chitcher's class, we had to give a speech. We had to teach a class. So at the end of the day, I'm not the maven of Chassidus, etc. Of course, even with our children, right? There's the shaitrim part of their life. We don't police our 20-year-olds, right? Meaning there's a graduation. They're growing. They're maturing, and as they mature, there are things that you obviously operate at a different level. Even as Yidden, right? Think about what happened. There was much more of a Kabbalah's all foundation, which starts up in terms of our history. It came to a point where Chassidus was needed. We got to a point almost of I would always say the teenage stage, where we have not the full answers, but we have so much more of a deeper understanding. And our teens can understand. We don't have the same fights with our teens about going to bed or things like that. Maybe bed for some people, but I'm saying so many teenagers are running to take a nap, right? It's funny, right? They get it. They understand and appreciate things differently because they've matured. And I think the whole point is that Mashiach times, that's going to be our ultimate maturing. We're going to have a great understanding of Eibusher and Hashem. And
we're not going to need policing.
It's because you're understanding. It's so interesting. We took out my daughter last night 2 nights ago for her birthday. A wonderful tradition I got from a friend. It's not a mitzvah from the Torah, but she comes from a very big family, Baruch Hashem. And I was asking her, I didn't grow up with a big family, right? I have 3 kids in my family, and I was the only girl, and my gap was 5 years from my brother. I had plenty of individual attention. Whereas, Baruch Hashem, Leah and her, my family is a lot of kids. And, the oldest is now 14. And that's, so I was asking her, how did it work in your family, or what do you do with your kids? Again, going back to that idea of ask. I don't have this point of reference, seek from people. So she talked about how she takes her kids out for their birthday and one-on-one, which I thought was really nice. So we do that. So we took her out, and she was asking different questions, which, she likes to ask these types of questions. How do we know the Torah is true? These types of questions, which
we thought we were so smart when we asked that, no?
Yeah. But you know what? At the end of the day, I remember my brother said, keep asking. It's great. It's good. And look, our Mefarshim ask. And of course, the first thing my husband told her is, you're in good company. These are great questions. But he just told her one thing that I thought was incredible. Meaning, I know this to be true, but just the way he said it and how he told her, he said to her, just don't forget, just because you don't feel satisfied with the answer now, doesn't mean that the question doesn't have an answer. And just remember that maybe you're not ready yet. You're not mature enough to have perspective enough to understand the answer right now. And so save it. Ask it again as you get older. Keep asking, right? We're different. We're not the same as we get older. Our brains mature. We have a different understanding. Obviously, Hashem feels that we're capable of being responsible at 12. Hashem feels that we're capable of being responsible. When I grew up, my parents told us there's no such thing as teenagers. The Torah doesn't have a place of teenagers.
Made up.
Yeah, there's children, and then you're an adult. You're responsible. Of course, though, our brains, we mature, and we obviously understand things more and more, and the more we learn, and obviously there is that element in Chassidus as well. You're supposed to be a daitem as Hashem Elokecha, and this is what we've brought to the world. It's incredible to see what Chassidus has done. And then ultimately, we're going to have Mashiach where, just like with our 20-year-olds and Beit Hashem and our 25-year-olds, I can give a shout out to my mother. Ma, don't get nervous, but because my mother always says I'm your mother till 120, and not necessarily, but the truth is that no, our 21-year-olds and our they're grown-ups. It's their own life, and it's their own connection with the Eibusher, and it's their own choices whether they brush their teeth or not. And you should be there to always be their mother and let them know your opinion, and you can advise them. And that doesn't mean you're policing them. You're not policing them. They're an adult. Like, obviously not, right? So as Yidden, we also have that. B'rut Hashem, like Mashiach's going to come, we're going to be in a different place. We're going to have a different understanding. And I always said, and at the end of that speech, I always said, the other worst thing that kids can't stand because I said so. And the other worst thing that they can't stand is when you get older, you'll thank me, right? But look what Hashem tells us. Aitcha Hashem can't have to be. You're going to thank me.
And we know from so many psukim how that bond is there.
Yes, 100%. One day we're going to thank Hashem for it, because why? It was for our good. So again, as parents, when we're choosing to do something because we truly believe it's what's good for them from a Torah Chassidish perspective, this is what's good for them. This is what's going to, even if they push back, even if they're not happy about it, I'm sure my daughter will not be thrilled. Unconditional love is the natural state. I'm sorry, it's used incorrectly.
Right. Okay.
It's a natural state. You can't do anything about it. It's there. That's how Hashem created it. That's why it's the basis for the mashals that we have, right? A father loves his son, just like a mother loves their child. That's the nature of it. Now, when people are using it these days, again, I don't really expose myself too much, but what I do is get a lot of pushback. And the pushback that I get usually translates into, I want to make sure that my child, no matter what they do, they get this message that they are unconditionally loved. And so therefore, I will never show them.
We get that from Hashem.
And therefore, I will never show them this. I shouldn't show them disappointment. You shouldn't necessarily be making them feel like something that they're doing is not making you proud. These are the things that I'm hearing that people are being told. That the idea of that this is not giving you nachas is not something that should be, highlighted, that it shouldn't be that, this unconditional love should be made sure that the child knows that no matter what they do, you love them unconditionally and you will never show them anything other than that.
Pause. Does Hashem love a Yid? 100%. Right? Even if you sin, you're Yisrael. 100%. No matter what, Hashem loves us.
100%. However, when we don't act as we should in the land of Israel, in the land of Eretz Yisrael, Hashem says, I will throw you out of the land. Hashem tells us, it's a punishment, by the way. We can use the word. It's okay. And you can use either one. I find it funny. Like, why are we there's schar and einesh in the Torah. It's not schar and consequence. Again, these things are just, even that, we're so hesitant to use the language that Hashem gave us, that the Rebbe gave us. It's amazing. You were asking me before what my pet peeves are or whatever it is. In my house, my kids know they cannot use the word bully. There's no reason for it. You mean the kid was mean to you? They were listening to their Yetzer Hara and they were not having Avos Yisrael? And they were not having Avos Yisrael on a very, very constant basis, and they really didn't stop there. Wow, their Yetzer Hara must be very, very strong. And that's unacceptable and that's not okay. And we're going to, deal with it. But bullying,
you don't like buzzwords.
Because the buzzwords, again, create a reality. And in Chassidus, we learn this. Again, this is from just my base Rivkah education. We learn our thoughts, how we see the world actually translates into speech and translates into action. It all has an impact. So if we're filling our minds with ideas that come outside of Torah's eternal MS, then it also formulates the words that come out of our mouth. And it also formulates the actions that we do. And we're seeing that in terms of how people are choosing to do things like raising their children, because they're getting this, the mindsets, how they see the world, how they frame things. Again, we can go back to the back and forth of unconditional love. I think that the way most people translate this into is that chas v'shalom, chas v'shalom, chas v'shalom, chas v'shalom, my child should feel a sense of disappointment, upsetness, these types of things, because that might make them feel that I don't love them. And it's such nonsense. I always say, growing up, people say it's a horrible thing that a child should, what's going to hold them back from doing something? Even as adults these days, it's another one of my pet peeves. We can go on and on, right? So, what holds them back from doing something? Oh, my parents are going to punish me. My parents, we used to use a very wrong phrase. My parents are going to kill me, right? Which is obviously chas v'shalom. It's not the right way of talking, and we shouldn't. Probably that also comes from the outside world, but the message is clear. And we learn the story of Yosef Hatzadik, and what is it that brought that really held him back at that last second? Because he was almost there. He was almost ready to do it, right? That action. It's picturing his father in his mind.
I did not take it that he's picturing his father's disappointment. I took it as he's picturing his father's inspiration. Like he's thinking of his father, and that gave him kayach to overcome his temptation.
So 1 second, so just to go back a second, I mean, not to take away from the fact that I know when we were in seminary and all these places where we would hear about that, we would take this story and we would learn from this of how to envision our Rebbe and to be inspired by picturing the Rebbe in our mind. And that would help us to and empower us to do what's right and to hold back from doing what's wrong. That's true. But the original source of the story, that everything we kind of hear after that, is sourced from the Gemara. And in the Gemara, it's very, very clear and very strong that what held Yosef back from actually going forward and really doing what was wrong was the fact that he envisioned his father in his mind and was scared, was afraid, because he knew, it says that Yaakov said that, the Shvatim are going to be inscribed on the stones on the Cheshen, and that he won't be on there, and that he was afraid to be cut off. So it's both the opposite. It was fear. It was the fear of being cut off from his father. Now, different things can inspire one to hold back. It doesn't always have to be that fear is what inspires. So yes, when we have a Skasha Star Rebbe and we're inspired to make the Rebbe proud, that's true. And yes, when our Farbringen and when we would learn and we would hear this, that's true. That's where, there are different ways to apply, etc. But we can't take away the fact that the initial story and the source for this story and what we're actually supposed to learn from was a story where the inspiration to hold back actually came from a place of fear. He didn't want to be cut off from his father.
And that reminder that our parents can infuse in us, that sense to hold back, is the greatest gift we can give our children. It's the greatest gift. And for someone to give the impression that that's a bad thing, that they can, that a child will feel, and then we should perform like they're going to be judged or they're going to be, no, it's a wonderful protection you give your child, that you've educated them on something, raised them with something, and that when they're in that moment where they have to make those choices, that they have their mother or father in their mind, and that might hold them back from doing the wrong thing. What a gift.
Okay, Gillie, I do hear that it's positive for a child to have a parent that they look up to and that taught them better, but I'm not sure, it almost sounds so negative to disappoint the parent, or it's not really about the parent. It's really about what Hashem wants. Why is this parent's disappointment a good thing?
So I think I think in your question, I feel like a lot of the answer lies there. And I always say, if I have to sum up Chassidus from my understanding, but I know it to be true as really summing up Chassidus, is that it's not about me. Nothing that we do should be because I want or I feel. It's all in the service of Eibishter, which is what the Rebbe constantly would say, like I said before, having a family is not because I want a family. Anything that we do is not because I want it, but because Hashem wants it, which again, by the way, goes back to the idea of Kabbalah Sol, right? Even if we understand what we're doing, we're taught so strongly that we still should be doing it from a place of Kabbalah Sol, because it's not because I get it that I'm doing it. It's because Hashem wants me to do it that I do it. So
why is a parent's disappointment relevant then?
So I think that it is so important, and most kids, again, are not stupid. They know that your disappointment isn't coming from a place of me, or make sure it's not. But I really do feel, again, if you believe this is what is good for your child, it won't be coming from me. It's because we as parents as well have an Eibishter. We've been taught, we have a Rebbe, we also answer to somebody, right? So we're not disappointed because we're disappointed and you've affected our egos. And if that's where it's coming from, definitely work on that, because it's nothing to do with you. And that's not something that we should ever be coming from a place of. We shouldn't be coming from a place of fear. We shouldn't be coming from a place of ego, etc. But I do think that we shouldn't also think about it too much. I think that we're naturally wired to love our children, and what we do for them is because we love them and want to do what's best for them. So them feeling that we are disappointed gives them a guidepost. It's kind of like when you're on a road and you're going off the road, and it kind of gives you those lines that make your car start vibrating. It gives you the understanding oh, I'm going off the right road. It's helpful to our children. It's not a negative. It's a safety net for them. It's what helped Yosef not go to the end, right? So I think we have to reframe our perspective from a Torah perspective. And then we do that by looking at the stories of Torah and not thinking that this is something that happened 3,000 years ago. Every single story from Torah is there to teach me about how I should look at everything, how I should feel about everything, how I should react to everything. Yosef had every reason. These days it's very funny. I'm sorry, I'm going to say a story. When my brother and sister-in-law moved down on Shluchos, one of the first years they had Rosh Hashanah. The sister-in-law, I came to do the kids program for 1.5 children. That style when it just starts off with the Chabad house. And they had, I don't know, I guess one of the parents had asked if one of their children, there were very few children. One of them was a young budding teenager, and they had asked, I guess, if the child could share something. So this is as follows. You can't even make this up, right? We know at Rosh Hashanah we talk about Sarah. So he says something to the effect of, listen, if Avram Avinu he didn't say it like that. If Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Yishmael had all gone for family counseling, things would have been different, right? It would have been, okay. So where was he coming from? He's coming from his perspective, his lens of how he sees the world. These days, if someone would look at the story of Yosef, I mean, talk about toxicity, right? Brothers just completely selling him. He has the miserable life. And what's Yosef's reaction to that? He doesn't cut off his brothers. He doesn't stop communication with them. What does he do? He recognizes where this is coming from. Of course, at the end of the day, he understands it's all from Eibishter. It's all from Hashem. These things are real.
And he's the prime example of Ben Adam L'Chaveri that the Tanya brings down.
Right.
Of recognizing that everything comes from Hashem.
So I think, again, a lot of it comes from our place of belief and understanding of that.
But you could think it comes from Hashem and still realize that certain things are not good for you, and therefore not associating with people that will do harm to you.
It depends. It depends if it's contradicting a commandment we have from the Eibishter. So if again, there's no judgment in this, but if we have a commandment from the Eibishter to honor our parents, then that commandment stands. It doesn't have, with the exception of, when somebody labels that parent to be toxic. Again, I'm not here to judge anyone's individual situation, but I do. And, this is something that, again, is the perspective we're getting a Jewish perspective? Or is it antithetical to Torah values? Are we just looking at the situation completely from the wrong angle? So I think those are definitely things. And I think a lot of that comes from a place of these days, there's a very strong push, again, from the outside world on emotions, right? On being in touch with our emotions, being in touch with our feelings. I always laugh and I tell the girls, I say, I just want you to know, when we were in high school, there was no such phrase as being in touch with your feelings. Just so you know, if someone would have asked us, are you in touch with your feelings? We would have asked them for a translation. Like, that's what we would have done. We have no idea what you're talking about. It's not that we weren't emotional. It wasn't that we didn't have feelings. It just wasn't a concept. I grew up, my father would always tell us, I don't care what you feel when you help the old lady cross the street, as long as you help the old lady cross the street. Again, giving a very clear message. Feelings are natural. Feelings are normal. But Eibishter and Torah and Chassidus tells us that we have to know what's right and what's wrong. And hopefully the goal is that we get our feelings. We will then work on our machshava to then get our hearts to feel what is right.
Generate the positive
Exactly.
emotions of the Nefesh Elokis, and which we do, we do through Chassidus. Wow.
I want to just share one last story. I think it's very funny, very cute, that happened recently with high school girls. I was asked if I bring for a school, and it goes back to the article a little bit. And the girls were sitting there. They were a lovely group of girls, really. Again, anytime I interact with girls, I almost redouble down on my article, right? Like I really just feel like they're just so wonderful. So I come there and I'm sitting, and on the table, there's a paper tablecloth with markers and crayons. Now I know that I'm coming into a bigger program. So I don't know what happened. Before I came, I'm walking into this, if I bring in I think it was for Hey Teves. And I just pause for a second. I'm in the middle of our bring and I pause for a second because I do see some girls coloring. I said, girls, was there an activity before this that involved, coloring on the tablecloth? So the girls explained, no, it's here so that, sometimes we just need a fidget. We need a doodle. We need to do things while we're listening. So I absolutely did not want the girls to feel like I was criticizing them, not because I can't, but it wasn't their fault. Meaning, obviously, this is what school set up for them. This was given permission to. There's no reason for me to give them critique because it's not something that they did wrong. On the flip side, I said, I just want you girls to know one thing. This is, if this is the standard and this is fine in your school, I'm not here to, get involved. However, I want you to know you are capable of sitting at a farbrengen and not doodling and not fidgeting. You are capable of it. I want you to know that about yourself, because at the end of the day, you don't have to sell yourself short. You really are, because ultimately,
but
the
who cares?
highest level,
In other words, who cares?
Because it's disrespectful. Essentially, let's get
okay.
let's get down to the bottom of it.
No, that's the point.
Would you do this? Would you think it's considered? The president comes to speak, and I'm not the president. I'm not trying to compare myself, but my point is, using an extreme to prove a point, it's not considered respectful. We would not do that. It's just not. I mean, in front of a teacher, imagine. I mean, we have something set up.
I'm sorry, you're talking to the girl who doodled at the
that's true.
The lines of all my
notes.
True.
That's true. That's fine, and that's okay. However, you were not given. School did not provide for you the means to.
I didn't pull out a pack of crayons.
And you didn't line your desk. And if you had, you would have been, you would have been guided to do so otherwise, right? That's very different, right? I wanted them to know, I said, and we were joking around. They said, by the way, you should just know you're also capable of lasting 45 minutes in a period of class without water. Like, you should just know we weren't allowed to drink water in class. I wanted them, my point is just realize you're capable of more. Just because you're allowed to do all these things and you're constantly being kind of pandered to, doesn't mean you should stay there. Like,
reminds me of the Hayam Yaim about like, of us meg darfmanish. Like, just because you're allowed to, it doesn't mean you need it.
I remember us having this argument, and you were very passionately teaching me that, because I was very much coming from a place of, where my parents would censor the movies, but I was allowed to watch movies, and my parents would censor the books, meaning whatever their standards were, because they were coming.
By the way, you should all know that this is why it's, I laugh. I'm like, wait, Gillie's the one who's so strong now? Like, hello, role reversal.
Well, I think I was always stronger in these types of elements because I got it from my parents, and I do think that, but when it came to Chassidus Yanim, that was something that I really I didn't grow up with as much. So 100% in that way. And in terms of the basic and the foundations and all these things, I really, really do think, and I have an opportunity to publicly think. So thank you, Mommy, and thank you, Daddy. Shed a lot of nachas. I think that's something that I definitely did come with, but the Chassidus Yanim, I really do feel you were a huge part of me getting a lot more knowledge in that area.
Wow, Gillie, this has been amazing. I do expect some of you to have questions, and feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, and of course, I just want to end off by saying that we should all have Yidsha and Chassidus nachas from our children, and we're all doing our very best. And I always say, just remember, mommies, Hashem doesn't make a mistake. We are the mothers of our children, with our natures, with our, default setting, whatever it is. Clearly, that's what's best for our kids, and we should all have true emes and Chassidus nachas from our children and our families, and Hashem be together with Mashiach now.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for listening to the Optimizing Mother podcast. Please like, share, subscribe. Thank you.